Do you ever ask yourself questions along the lines of, is this a situation that requires me to bring out my tough love or my softer side? Or maybe, is it time to bring out my inner boss or my team player? But sometimes the answer just isn't clear, and it can feel like two parts of you get into some kind of battle for supremacy. It's like War of the Selves inside. You're all jammed up, maybe confused, afraid, and really not sure, which self is my best self right now. Sometimes that can end up with you feeling paralysed, or sometimes you end up getting, exactly the opposite outcome that you wanted. Well, in this episode, we're going to look at the thinking that perpetuates this inner conflict and why it's flawed. Plus, I'll share my take on how you can end the war and get the outcome that you really want. Sound good? Well, stay with me. Hit it, Kim.
Welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast. You're in the right place if you're a growth-seeking being who acknowledges the challenges and delights of your humanity on the path to an ever more conscious life. If you want to feel inspired to love and accept yourself, to feel free to be and express you in all your brilliance, if you want to truly value yourself and others and feel energized and alive both at home and in the world, then sit back and take a breath as you explore and grow the brilliance of your beautiful human self with your host, the father of non-personal awareness and creator of the MPA process, Joel Young.
Hello, and welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. I'm delighted that you're here, and we are up to episode number 75, which means if you want to get a look at the show notes, you can go to www.beabrillianthuman.com/75. And that means there are, including this one, 75 episodes to listen to. If you're brand new here, welcome. You can get to the show notes for any of the episodes with that simple syntax for the URL, which is www.beabrillianthuman.com/ then the number of the episode. And I'm delighted you're here if you're brand new. It's fantastic that you found me, however you did that. And if you're back for more, I love you so much. I'm so grateful and feel very privileged that you allow me into your ear space for about half an hour every week. That's really fantastic. If you haven't yet subscribed, you can hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening to this. And of course, I always welcome people to get in touch. Let me know what you think about the show, if you like it, if there's something else you'd like. If you have any ideas of what you'd like me to talk about on this show, please do let me know. You can get in touch via social media. I'm generally at Joel Young MPA. If you're on YouTube, it's youtube.com/Joel Young. And on Facebook, just go to MPA Rocks, find MPA, that's November Papa Alpha Rocks, and that's generally the page for MPA. Speaking of MPA, especially if you're new, then MPA stands for non-personal awareness. I talk about it quite a bit on this show as I am the creator of MPA. Generally, it's a simple way to stop taking things personally. Ultimately, it's a way to, if you really dive into MPA as the process and the philosophies, it helps you begin to live a really non-stick life where you don't take other people's opinions so personally. You get very clear on what really matters to you. And it's a wonderful, magical tool which you can use in your personal life or also professionally. So part of it, if you really want to take either as a new career or if you're an existing change worker, coach, therapist, that kind of thing, it's a great tool to add into your toolbox, which we have found can really accelerate all the wonderful, amazing modalities that exist. And also it can be used as a standalone approach to help people make their lives a whole lot better. If you haven't already, you can download the MPA process, which is a six-line, simple spoken word process. You can download that absolutely free. You can go to joelyoungmpa.com, find it there. There's a link also on the show notes because it's like a blog. There's always a side panel. You can always access the MPA sheet there. You can download it, have a play, see how you feel, and if it resonates, if you find use with it, then I recommend you come and do the training. The track really is basic training, which helps you to install it into your life so you can become non-stick. And then if you're someone who works with other people or want to take it even deeper, then you can go through the advanced training, which how you really get to understand it as a resistance-free approach, so you don't experience resistance in the transformational process. And again, if you have clients, it helps them to have a non-resistant experience, which gives you more energy as the therapist and them feeling much better after the sessions. And if you really want to go for it, then coming up very soon, I'll be announcing Mastery. Mastery is our professional training where you get certified by us here, by me at MPA Central, as a certified practitioner of the MPA approach. All right, so what are we talking about today? Well, as I said, I love to hear feedback from people, and last week I gave a shout out to Mary, who started listening from episode 1, and last week had got through to episode 48. She's now sent me an email. She's completely up to date. Yeah, you, Mary. And she also, again, I often say, let me know if you've got any questions. And she asked a number of questions in the hope that they might inspire some episodes. And one of her questions in particular has inspired this episode. And it's really about that inner conflict of we have many parts to ourselves, and sometimes we're not sure which is the best part of us to bring forward in certain situations. And it can be really tricky, and we end up tripping over ourselves. The way that Mary asked it was really, she said, how do I make space for less dominant selves? And she talked about how her work self tends to be dominant. So she'll bring the work self into relationship situations, and has found that isn't always the most helpful. So sometimes what we're talking about today can show up that way, where you have that sort of dominant self, that the classic thing is the kind of work self. If I do a bit of a gender-based stereotype, the guy brings his CEO work mentality home, and his wife's looking for more understanding, but he's just in kind of, fix it, delegate it, project manage it. But inside, he may feel like there is that softer side. He's just not sure how that works or anything else. There becomes this inner conflict. So we're looking specifically at how that shows up in yourself, what you can do about it, and also what is it that perpetuates that? What is it that means that that we end up really in a logjam around that situation? All right, so let's do this. All right, so I'm afraid the title of this episode is Which Self is My Best Self, or Which Me is My Best Self? And it's interesting to me because a little bit of Google research says that question is asked by a lot of people. And I'm starting with that because I think it goes to the heart of one of the main problems here, is because fundamentally, that question often goes to an idea that it's almost like the Lord of the Rings. There's one ring to bind them all, or to rule them all. And I think we often think that there's one self, our higher self or our best self, or, whatever you want to call that. There is a self that is the best in all situations. And then we flip-flop between the truth of it, which is there are many aspects to ourselves. In fact, we are a collection of selves. That's the true nature of our human psychology. We are many selves. There isn't like one facet to us. We're multifaceted creatures. And so within that, the real question is, which is the best self in a particular situation, rather than which is the best self in all situations. And yet there is a natural humanity to wanting to be the best that we can be, or our best selves, you could say, in all situations. Why? Because, we want to feel good about ourselves. We want to feel effective in relation to our intentions. And usually there's an aspect in there where we don't want to create hurt, by getting it in quotes wrong, making the wrong decision about which part of ourselves we bring forward or express. Whether that means we end up trying to avoid hurting ourselves or hurting others. And there's often that equation that bounces around inside of ourselves. And also, I think, anybody who's listening to this, if you're listening to this, chances are that you want to be more self-aware. And there's an understanding that the more we become aware of the parts and the motivation then the more we can begin to nuance, what parts of us show up in different situations. So, whether it's a situation where, there's an aspect of yourself which is really effective in one area but tends to sort of leak over into other areas, or whether it's a straight up kind of that kind of inquisitive, is it tough self or soft self, and you're just not sure in the situation. What I've noticed that people feel, and I've certainly experienced this myself, is the chances are, if you're in the front line of this, if you're experiencing this, it probably feels like a habit. It probably feels like you've just got the habit of this is how I respond. This is where sort of relational history and stuff like that can come into it, because you've learned that the best of a bad bunch normally in terms of our strategies is a certain one, so you tend to bring it to the party. But then the experience from that usually is exactly what I said in the intro, which is you end up creating the exact opposite of what you actually wanted. You end up feeling very confused. It can get into this sort of self-persecution kind of aspect where you beat yourself up because you didn't pick the right you or didn't act a certain way. And again, just like Mary said, there's this sort of gaping longing to let other parts of you have more room or more space, but that can be very difficult. And often what that's about is over time we build a lack of trust in the parts of us that are less practiced. They're definitely there, they're definitely parts of us, but they're less practiced. And we tend to be more afraid of letting them come to the surface, normally because of experiences that we've had. We can't really escape our history. We can learn from it, we can inform it, we can mature our response to it. But often those things mean that we become very wary of certain parts of us, even though they exist and are alive in us. But I think the thing that really underpins the system by which, or the system of thinking by which we end up going around in circles, getting jammed up, is something which I pointed to very much. I talked a lot in last week's episode, where I talked about the relational space, and how the fundamental sort of old school, as I see it, the old school relationship strategy is based on the idea of one way is right and one way is wrong, or it might translate there as one way is right for them, or is it right for them, or is it right for me, or one way is good or makes me a good person, or one way is bad or makes me a bad person. But it's very polar. There's definitely sort of polar opposites that are happening in there, and it ends up with a this or that kind of approach, which is a recipe for going round in circles. So, and then what we do in that is we look for some kind of formula that can tell us which is the right way, which is the wrong way, whether we're to blame or whether we're right. All of these ways of looking at things, and we try and find some formula, because that's the nature of duality. You find a formula, you fix it. But again, within that sort of polarized, this way's right, this way's wrong kind of approach, you can end up getting into that victim persecutor cycle, and that can happen within the self. So let's say that there's the tough side and the softer side. So maybe the tough side, maybe it's the more masculine sort of, and it's there because it feels it needs to be tough because somebody's got to take charge. And yet there's this softer side, which is more passive, more maybe feminine, more kind of hasn't got that same thing. But what happens is, because the tough side tends to put its foot down on the softer side, the softer side can end up going into the sense of feeling like it's persecuted by the tough side and is a victim. So this can all happen very internally, and it just builds and builds these conflictual energies that mean we end up with clouded minds and confused and less able to sort of empathize outside of ourselves, if that's the situation. But it just makes us disabled mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and really doesn't help things. And then, of course, then you go around in circles, victim, persecutor, backwards, forwards, which way is the right way? We second guess, maybe again, as I'm using the War of the Selves thing, maybe the softer side gains ground, but then, get second guessed. And it's like a fog of confusion. The thing about that is, when we get into this fog of confusion, often what can happen is especially like the less dominant parts or the less favored parts can tend to collapse, and then no change happens. And what kicks in then is what started this whole thing, because it comes from our history, is confirmation bias. I did a whole episode with a great friend and mentor of mine, James Lavers, episode 47. I'll link that in the show notes. Where we talked about confirmation bias, which is basically what the thinker thinks the prover proves. So if some part of you feels like it's persecuted, it's victimized, it's got no space, it's not allowed, it'll always create pain, all of those things, we tend to prove it. The way we perceive things, the way that we look at things tends to get proved. And hence we go round in this circle, and the habit of pain is formed. So, that's a pretty dire situation, but that can be the situation. Let me know if you relate to that, tell me. But that's what I see, is that we get into this, and it all comes from this either or, this or that. Is it this way or is it that way? And when you address that, you can begin to find a different way, a more effective way forward, which we're going to talk about next. So as I say, I do recommend you go back and listen to episode 74 if you haven't, which is an episode which is sharing a segment of a live event that I did, and something that I've taught a lot in the past about the relational space. And it really goes into where that whole either or, my way is the right way, your way is the wrong way, which can happen internally as well as internally and externally, in more detail. But one of the things that I talk about in that episode is about looking at there just being different perspectives. And if you can open into the awareness that that's the case, you can begin and acknowledge that, there's this relational space. It is what it is. Listen to the episode. But the point is, I encourage you to try and help things become a little bit wider, because as long as you've got this kind of competitive struggle internally, for this battle for supremacy of this aspect is right, this aspect is wrong, and they both think they're right and they both think the other is wrong. That is what gets you going round in circles. You can't see the wood for the trees. You can end up flip-flopping between the two because maybe one wins for a moment, the other one then asserts itself. This is the recipe for a lot of inner conflict and pain. So again, the recommendation is that we go a little bit wider. Why? Because if you're in two dimensions, right or wrong, that doesn't actually help. You have to sort of open your mental apertures a little bit. But I want to go today into how that might look in this kind of situation. So you've got two parts of you. If you step out of the right and wrong, then you have to make a different assumption. So in a sense, what I would encourage you to do is to assume that both parts have positive intentions, and recognize that they just have different methods or different routes to get to those positive intentions. And while it might not be immediately obvious that there is commonality in those intentions, the trick here is to find the point, and you might have to go wider and wider to sort of look at what those are, to find that commonality. So that would start with looking at, what are the positive intentions of each part. Another way to look at that is, what are the intended outcomes? Now, sometimes when you do this, you might find that, say, the intended outcome of the soft side isn't immediately obvious, or the tough side isn't immediately obvious. But it may first of all show up as, what's their strategy. Tough love in itself is like a strategy. You need to lay down the law, tell them if they don't do this, they're going to have to go to their room, that kind of thing. And whether you're doing that with yourself, it can be like, I have to just make myself not eat that crappy food. That's a strategy. So if you want to get to the intention, you need to ask yourself a question like, so there's a strategy, but if the strategy works, what's the intended outcome for that? If I did that, what would the positive outcome be? Then you're going to get more in the realm of intentions. And again, so I seem to have gone with a tough love on food, as it's more an internal thing. Maybe the softer side is to just be nice to yourself, eat what you love. And again, that kind of is a strategy, but what is the outcome of that? So maybe the tough love outcome is to, to be fitter. And maybe that's also the tough love, that's also the intention ultimately of the softer side. So, but that's the thing, is to find a common intention. Now, there won't always immediately be an obvious common intention. So sometimes you need to go a little bit more. So if it was different, then you would say, well, if that happened, what would be the outcome of that? And sometimes you might have to go quite wide. And what I mean by that is often the language gets more general. So it may be that one side wants a six-pack and one side just wants to feel, like they're in control of their food. But what would that mean? A six-pack might mean that they feel really good about themselves and, feeling more, relaxed about food or kinder in the food choices also does the same thing. So as you go a little bit wider, or it might be that you don't even get to a commonality there and you have to go to, we just both want to feel good or feel peace or just something very simple. But if you keep going wider, if you keep going more general, you'll find a common intention. And that's the key to it. Once you've got a common intention, that can be the focus. In a way, what you're saying is where there's been a war between these two parts, there's something you can find that you both parts agree on. And that becomes your measure. Now you can ask more powerful questions. Okay, how can that be achieved? Now, clearly, you've been asking that question. You have two answers. It's tough love or it's softer side. But then you have to kind of ask which aspect of each, the tough love and the softer side, which aspects will work for that and which aspects don't work. Because if it's not been working, then chances are the tough love, let's say the ultimate goal is peace, then the tough love, some of it doesn't bring peace. So that's the stuff you drop. And similarly, it may be that the softer side also, there's parts that don't bring peace and there's parts that do. But what this gives you is a basis of exploration that has a commonality. So you've already transcended the conflict. And it's like, rather than pulling against yourself, you're pulling together within yourself. And that's a much more powerful position to be in. All right, so let's sum this up, really put it in a succinct way. When you've got two parts that are warring with each other and you feel jammed up by it, the underlying thing that I really want you to take away from today, and again, you can get it more in depth if you listen to the last episode, episode 74, is that you're suffering from right way or wrong way, from dualistic thinking, from polarized ways of looking at things. And that's what puts you in the battle. Also, if you're asking which self is my best self, you have to acknowledge that there are always going to be many selves. So part of the way forward for us as humanity, to be rather grandiose about it, is to recognize that it really is a dance of selves, not a war of supremacy within the self. And it really is about navigating which aspects of ourselves are most appropriate contextually in the moment. But when you've got the either or going on, it gets very clunky. It's like putting sand into an engine. And what we need is oil, and that lubrication is the ability to recognize that all the parts have common intentions, and it's more of a dialogue and a negotiation and an understanding of what are the common intentions. Common intentions are so powerful. Now, you may need to sort of do some investigation work there, looking at sometimes we think strategies are the motivations, but the strategies are just methods, ways to get there, and that's often what is the problem that gets the jam up. So you might have to make the language more general, make it a little bit wider till you find a common intention. And what you've got there is like you've got your measure. That's the thing to focus on. As long as you're focused on that common intention and then are willing to explore the positive and negatives of each strategy, or even find a whole new strategy, then you're pulling together, not pulling yourself apart. So again, let's say that the common intention you find is a very general one, like, both these parts of you want peace. Then you can ask questions like, what does that look like? What does that look like, peace, to both parts? How can each part contribute towards peace? What parts of each piece of you, each side of you, what parts of their strategies don't bring you peace, if peace is that common intention? And what else could bring peace to both parts, or bring peace that both parts will feel aligned with? So again, you see it's much more exploratory. Now you know what you're both pulling for, you can begin to explore. And, it may be that neither of those parts really are doing the job. So you could just say, what if peace itself was in charge? What would peace do? So you can lead yourself into a place where the forward momentum is focused on the positive intention that is agreed by all parts. Now, the way you can do this, there's lots of ways to do this, but journaling is a really powerful way to do it. It's a job of journaling and inquiry. Just get out a piece of paper and start asking yourself those questions. And I often say, if you're using inquiry, ask the question. I've given you some good questions there, and I'll write those down in the show notes. Ask the question, let the answer find you. Literally imagine there are, these parts of you are, sat, at a table, or maybe over a nice dinner, or maybe around a campfire, whatever way you want to do that, and just have the dialogue. But if you set the wider intention of, this is a dialogue to find the common intention and both work towards that, then you can begin to really pull forward. Now, obviously, that might seem like a fair bit of work to do, but if you've got something that's been ingrained for a long time and you recognize a pattern, it's worth the investment of time. And of course, it feels like, I don't know how to do that, then you can always get some help. Find someone who can support you in that. You can certainly get in touch with me. I do offer one-to-one sessions. You can go to joelyoungmpa.com/sessions. You can even book a call with me for absolutely free. We can just do 10 minutes. Main intention of that call is to find out what's going on, if I can help you. And then, if you want to go ahead and book some sessions, we can do that there. But again, it's not like it's a big pressure on you. I just listen. And if I don't feel I can help you, or there's someone better than me for your specific thing, I will direct you in that way. So that's how it works. But you can go to joelyoungmpa.com/sessions and then just book a clarity call, as I call it, and we can have a chat and see if that works for you. Or get your journal out and just go for it, see what happens. All right, so I think that brings us to the close. By the way, again, last week and this week, I'm asking you to let me know if you're interested. I actually have a really powerful, super simplified, mega amazing technique which does this job beautifully in the context of MPA particularly, which I'm thinking of sharing in an event. Last week I talked about a live event, but I'm also open to doing it as a pre-recorded, like a program as well. Let me know if you're interested. It's something that sort of will lay out a practical approach to resolving conflicts like these. So inner conflict, but it also resolves conflict with others. So if it's you and somebody else and you've got conflict going on. And even if there's areas in life where I know for a lot of people, when other people, especially two people they love, if they're in conflict, it brings up a lot of stuff inside. And this practical technique that I am thinking of sharing in a program is incredibly powerful for that. And again, also it's great, you can use it for your own self-development, but it's also, this is something that I use pretty much with every single client that I see, and always it's like you get like that wow factor from using this approach, especially in conjunction with MPA. So if you're interested even in principle about that, then you can there'll be a note on the show notes, and you can get in touch with me and let me know that you're just interested. No commitment, just I want to find out. It helps me know that it's something that is worth me putting my time into to make, because people want to get their hands on it. And I may do it live and record it and then produce it as a product, so you don't have to necessarily be there live. I made it that way, I made it pre-recorded, but let me know your preference. How do you like to receive things? Do you prefer a bit of a live event, or do you like to have things like nicely done and in a package and then you just do it at your own pace? Just let me know. I would love your input. Right, I think that's it. Final thing is, if you've enjoyed this show, make sure you've subscribed. I'd love it if you can share it. Tell someone. The best way to share it is just to talk to someone. If you know someone that has this experience, just say, oh, I've just listened to this podcast. It's called Be a Brilliant Human with Joel Young. And you can go and find it on all the usual things, Spotify, Apple, Google, all the ones. It's on YouTube and on Anchor, of course. Just let them know and direct them in this direction, and that would be a great favor to me, and hopefully a great favor to them too. All right, that's it. We're done. Time to close this show off. I will see you next time. Big hugs, and all that remains is to cue the moo.